Imagine you're in an upscale store, checking out a new item, when out of nowhere, a cop storms in, and all eyes are on you. You're stunned as he singles you out, questioning you with suspicion, like you're some intruder. But here's the twist, he has no idea who you really are. In fact, you're not just a customer, you're the son of the store's owner. This cop's about to make a huge mistake, and it's one that could cost him big. What happens next is not just a lesson for him, but for everyone watching. Today, we're diving into a story that highlights how powerful assumptions and stereotypes can be, and how often they lead to stunning mistakes. It's a story about a young black man, Justin, who walked into his family's high-end store like he'd done 100 times before. It should have been an ordinary visit, just picking something up for his mom. But instead, he found himself face-to-face with a cop who couldn't see past his own assumptions. In an instant, Justin went from being a son running an errand to a target of suspicion, simply for looking like he didn't belong. This confrontation was about to explode, capturing the attention of everyone around and turning into a moment that would make headlines. Stay tuned, because this story takes some unexpected turns that reveal more than just one cop's bias. It reveals the everyday reality of assumptions gone wrong. Devin walked into the store that day with nothing on his mind except picking up a few things. This was his family's store, after all, an elegant, upscale boutique filled with everything from designer clothes to rare, high-end accessories. Devin had been here countless times, even helped out during busy holiday seasons, so he felt right at home among the neatly organized displays and familiar staff. But as he wandered through the aisles, picking out an item his mom had asked him to grab, he noticed a few eyes lingering on him a little too long. Some of the shoppers' faces looked uneasy, and he could feel the quiet whispers following him through the store. Brushing it off, he tried to ignore the glances, thinking it was just one of those days. Then, out of nowhere, a police officer strode in, eyes scanning the store before landing directly on Devin. The officer approached him, his posture stiff and face unreadable, as if he'd already decided Devin was guilty of something. Devin's stomach tightened as he realized the officer wasn't here for any routine checkup, he was here for him. "Can I help you with something?" Devin asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though he was more confused than anything else. The officer didn't answer directly. Instead, he launched into a line of questioning that felt accusatory from the get-go. "What are you doing here? Are you looking for something specific?" Devin was stunned, taken aback by the suspicion dripping from each word. Here he was, in his own family's store, getting treated like a stranger who didn't belong. He quickly explained that he was the owner's son, thinking this would put an end to the tension, but the officer only narrowed his eyes, clearly unwilling to believe him. At that moment, Devin felt the weight of something he'd known about but hadn't fully experienced himself, a bias that ran so deep it could erase any truth, any reality, simply based on his appearance. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was an accusation based on assumptions, and it wasn't going away easily. The tension in the room thickened as Devin realized he was in for a fight he hadn't asked for, and he had no idea how it would end. Devin stood there, grappling with a mixture of shock and frustration as he stared back at the officer. He had grown up around this store, practically learning its ins and outs like the back of his hand. It was a legacy his family had built from the ground up, a symbol of hard work and dedication that Devin had always admired. This place wasn't just a store to him, it was a piece of his family's history. Years ago, his father had started with a modest shop, filled with discounted clothing items. With years of effort, late nights, and countless sacrifices, his parents had transformed it into one of the most elegant and renowned boutiques in the city. From the carefully curated selection of luxury items to the immaculate decor, every detail in the store represented the vision his family had for their business. Devin often overheard customers marvel at how impressive it all was, never suspecting the countless hurdles his family had overcome to reach this level of success. And here he was, being questioned as if he were some kind of criminal intruder. As the officer continued his probing questions, Devin kept his voice steady, explaining once again that he was here to pick something up for his mother. But every attempt to clarify his presence only seemed to escalate the officer's skepticism. Devin could tell by the look in the officer's eyes that he wasn't really listening, wasn't willing to entertain the possibility that Devin belonged there. Taking a steadying breath, Devin decided to try a different approach. "Listen, my parents own this store. My family has run this place for years," he said, keeping his tone as respectful as he could. He pointed to a picture near the entrance, a framed portrait of his parents from the early days, with a younger version of himself peeking out from the background. "That's us, right there. This place is part of my family." But instead of an apology, the officer shot back, "You're telling me your family owns this place?" His tone dripped with disbelief, as though the idea was laughable. The question hung in the air, an unspoken accusation that Devin was lying. At that moment, a quiet determination took over Devin. He wasn't about to let this officer, or anyone, erase his family's story with a single assumption. Choosing his words carefully, Devin added, "If you don't believe me, I can call my mom, and she'll explain everything." He pulled out his phone, beginning to dial, all the while maintaining eye contact with the officer, making it clear he had nothing to hide. The officer shifted, visibly thrown off by Devin's calm and measured response. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected, no defensiveness, no anger, just a quiet confidence rooted in the truth. The tension in the room began to shift as Devin's words started to penetrate the thick barrier of suspicion the officer had built around himself. But as Devin continued explaining, something else happened. Shoppers who had initially kept their distance began stepping closer, watching the exchange unfold. A few of them even recognized Devin. They'd seen him helping his parents during busy weekends or setting up displays. One older woman, who often shopped there, finally stepped forward. "This young man is telling the truth," she said firmly. "I've seen him here before. He's always been polite and helpful." With that simple statement, it felt as though the room collectively exhaled. More people started murmuring in agreement, validating Devin's story. The officer, now facing a sea of skeptical faces, began to realize that he had perhaps misjudged the situation. Devin's calm approach and the support of familiar customers were slowly turning the tide, dismantling the officer's assumptions piece by piece. In the face of all this, Devin remained composed, holding his ground not through anger or raised voices, but through honesty and respect for his family's legacy. By standing up without losing his calm, he was not only defending himself but also upholding the values his parents had instilled in him, values of integrity, resilience, and respect. As the officer took a step back, visibly considering everything he had just heard, the dynamic shifted further. Devin could see a faint crack in the officer's hardened demeanor, as if he was beginning to question his initial judgment. Here was a young man, someone he'd pegged as suspicious at first glance, now holding his head high with dignity, reminding everyone present of the dangers of assumptions. At that moment, Devin understood that this was no longer just about him. It was about standing up for his family, for their story, and for everyone who had ever been unfairly judged. The encounter was leaving an impression on everyone present, sparking conversations that would carry forward long after the incident itself. Devin's quiet courage had changed the narrative, showing that sometimes the strongest response is one of quiet resolve rather than outrage. And as the officer slowly realized his mistake, the entire store watched, reminded of a simple truth: the danger of judging a book by its cover, and the quiet power of standing up for what is right. Just when it seemed like the situation had reached a stalemate, the store's glass doors swung open, and in walked a familiar figure, Devin's father, Mr. Anderson. He was dressed in a crisp suit, exuding the calm confidence that came from years of hard work and dedication. The moment he stepped inside, the entire atmosphere shifted. Heads turned as he strode forward, his expression firm yet calm, and his gaze focused directly on the officer standing in front of his son. The officer, catching sight of Mr. Anderson's commanding presence, glanced back and forth between him and Devin, the realization slowly dawning on him that something didn't add up. But Mr. Anderson didn't raise his voice or look outraged. He simply approached Devin and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, his eyes full of quiet pride as he looked at his son. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Mr. Anderson asked, his voice steady and respectful, though there was a clear firmness in his tone. The officer stammered, taken aback by the man's poised approach. There was a call about a suspicious person in the store, he replied, stumbling over his words. I was just investigating. Devin's father gave a small nod, his face neutral yet unyielding. And you thought my son, who helps run this store, was suspicious? Silence filled the room. Customers and staff alike stood frozen, eyes darting between Devin, his father, and the officer, whose face was growing redder by the second. Devin held his head high, refusing to look away from the man who had so quickly misjudged him. After a long pause, Mr. Anderson continued, Officer, this is my son, Devin Anderson. My wife and I own this store, and Devin has been a part of it since he was a child. We built this business with our own hands, working tirelessly to make it what it is today. And my son? He's as much a part of this place as I am. The weight of Mr. Anderson's words hung heavy in the air, each syllable punctuating the officer's mistake with undeniable clarity. It was as if every person in the room collectively understood the impact of what had happened, that this wasn't just an issue of misunderstanding, but a painful example of how dangerous assumptions could be. The officer's confidence visibly faltered as he processed the revelation. He glanced down, avoiding Mr. Anderson's steady gaze, knowing there was no excuse he could offer to justify what he had done. His entire line of questioning, his entire attitude, had been built on a false assumption about who Devin was. And now, faced with the truth, he was left with nothing but the shame of his own actions. One of the customers, who had watched the entire ordeal unfold, spoke up, her voice filled with empathy and frustration. This young man did nothing wrong. He's been nothing but polite and respectful every time I've seen him here. And yet, this is how he's treated? The murmurs of agreement grew louder, customers voicing their disapproval of the officer's behavior, and the weight of the crowd's disappointment became almost tangible. For a moment, the officer tried to respond, stumbling over his words, but he quickly realized there was no defense. He had wrongfully profiled someone, a young man who had done nothing but walk into his own family's store. Devin's father turned to his son, his voice softening. Devin, I'm proud of you for handling this with such grace. You've shown everyone here today the strength of your character. Devin nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude that his father was by his side. The confrontation, though painful, had shown him just how powerful it was to stand his ground, to face injustice without letting it steal his dignity. He knew he'd been wronged, but he also knew that his response had been an opportunity to show the world, starting with everyone in that store, that prejudice and bias had no place in his family's legacy. As Mr. Anderson placed an arm around Devin's shoulders, the officer finally managed to stammer out an apology. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed. He trailed off, knowing that no words could undo the hurt he had caused. Mr. Anderson looked at him, his gaze unwavering. I hope that this is a lesson, officer. It's far too easy to make snap judgments. But next time, remember that every person deserves respect, no matter who they are or what you think you know about them. The officer nodded, looking humbled and remorseful, as he left the store in silence. The crowd slowly dispersed, some offering words of support to Devin, others shooting disapproving glances at the door where the officer had exited. In the midst of it all, Devin felt a surge of pride, not just in himself, but in the support his family and community had shown him. And as he and his father stood together, side by side, Devin knew that they had made an impact, a powerful reminder that prejudice would never overshadow the integrity of their family or the legacy they had built. The incident had left its mark, but it had also revealed the quiet resilience that would carry them forward, stronger than ever. In the aftermath of that intense day, Devin's story spread far beyond the walls of his family's store. The incident left a deep mark, not just on Devin, who had faced an unfair judgment with grace and resilience, but on everyone who witnessed it. The store's patrons and community members began to see Devin in a new light, recognizing him as someone who symbolized patience, strength, and the power of standing up for what's right. For Devin's family, the experience underscored the importance of their values. They had built their business on respect, integrity, and hard work, and they knew that those values would always guide them, even through challenges like this. Mr. Anderson took it upon himself to organize community events that addressed issues of equality and respect, using their family store as a place for positive change and awareness.